Hi, I'm Dr. George Yancey. Let's shatter some paradigms. And the paradigm I want to shatter today is a paradigm between racism and Christianophobia. I find myself in a very unique position. I'm a race scholar. And by that, what I mean is that I have published peer-reviewed journal articles, peer-reviewed books on the topic of race. People can disagree with me, and that's fine. I'm not saying because I'm a scholar you have to agree with everything I say, but I am a race scholar. I have studied this stuff deeply. I also have been doing work on Christianophobia. I think that's a real thing. I am theologically a conservative Christian. I make no bones about that. Like me, hate me, that's just who I am. So here I am with all this knowledge about racism and one of the few academics who are seriously studying Christianophobia. What do I think about racism and Christianophobia? At times I've heard people say that they understand what it's like to be an African American because they have faced sexism or homophobia or things of this nature. I'm not denying that there's some commonalities. I've even heard Christians say they know what it's like to be, white Christians say they know what it's like to be black because they face Christianophobia, which is a very real thing. And if you don't believe that, go to one of my videos on Christianophobia. But that always doesn't sit well with me. So I want to look at this. I want to be very fair about this. So there are similarities, okay? So let's look at some of the similarities and the differences so that we can talk in a more knowledgeable, more mindful manner of this and more sensitive manner. What are the similarities? Well, be it racism or Christianophobia, and I've experienced both in some of these similarities. There's a certain amount of unfair stereotyping. I can't tell you how many times I've had people not assume that I'm very intelligent because I'm black, especially when I was younger. I've had car doors locked because they thought I was a threat. There are stereotypes, and there's stereotypes of Christians. I've been on the other end of people assuming, that I'm uneducated because I'm a conservative Christian. So there's unfair stereotyping. There is hatred both ways. The people who hate Christians are a little bit more open about their hate, but I've experienced hate as an African American. I've experienced that sort of rejection as an African American. And even today, some of the ways people talk about us as a people is very hateful and very hurtful. So there's stereotyping, there's hatred, there's a desire to reject the other. Because to certain types of non-Christians, conservative Christians are the other, to be rejected, to not have a place in our society. And for some non-blacks, we're the other, to be rejected. I acknowledge those similarities. I think that's fair. However, there are some very clear differences between racism and Christianophobia. Let's first look at racism. Racism has been ginned up over centuries of racial abuse. Unlike Christianophobia, which in the United States is relatively recent, if we're not looking at anti-Catholicism, if we're looking at Christians in general, conservative Christians in general, it's relatively recent. Doesn't mean it's not important, but it's not these centuries of racial abuse. This has created dynamics, institutional dynamics, social dynamics that are deep into our society. I talk about some of these issues when I look at institutional racism, and I have a video up on that, which I encourage you to check out. This also leads to a certain dynamic of racism that's not there with Christianophobia. That racial abuse has often been violent. And violence is something that African Americans face in a way that conservative Christians don't face, or at least don't face as much. Because of the stereotype of us African Americans as being kind of like a thug, I guess. I'm not saying all police officers are bad, but I do believe sometimes police officers are more, shall I say, aggressive with African Americans than with European Americans. And there's some research that backs that up. African Americans are more likely to be victims of violence, sometimes by other African Americans, but we're more likely to be victims of violence from blacks and non-blacks. There's a violence to racism that's not nearly as present. I'm not going to say it's not present at all, because anytime you say it never happens, then someone will bring up a case where it does happen, but not nearly as present. It's not nearly the problem for a conservative Christian as for African Americans. As a conservative Christian, I don't worry about someone beat me up for being a conservative Christian. So that is clearly differences that we have to take into account. If you're a conservative Christian thinking, well, I know what it's like to be black, and you're not black, I'm sorry, but you don't. Likewise, what about conservative Christians? What do they face that perhaps African Americans do not face? Well, interesting. When you look at research, what you'll find is that people are more open at insulting them than they are African Americans. They're more open about their disdain. And this has led to a situation to where it's more viable to try to, shall we say, cancel a conservative Christian, to say this person's beyond the pale, that we don't want them around. They believe things that we don't accept, and they're not allowed to have those beliefs. There are cases in academia of conservative Christians in academia where academics try to get rid of them because they were a conservative Christian. I know of no such case as an African American. In fact, I've said, and I stand by the same, I face more problems in academia as a conservative Christian than as an African American. So there's more of a chance they'll be canceled. The culture is less sympathetic to you as a conservative Christian than as an African American. You know, the pop stars and the entertainment and media, they'll celebrate African American culture in a way they will not celebrate conservative Christian culture. So there's a rejection from the culture that conservative Christians face that African Americans at this point in time really don't face as much. I think in the past that was different, but in this point in time, really not. And I say this as an African American. I'm not saying that all of our culture is always uplifted, but I see it much more against conservative Christians. So that is a difference. Conservative Christians have to be more worried about people with cultural power than African Americans. We should be mindful of these differences. We should be aware of these differences and not be too quick to equate one with the other because they have some general similarities. You get what I'm saying? Racism is a problem in our society. The way it manifests itself today is different than the way it used to manifest itself, but it's still a problem. Christianophobia is a problem in our society. The way it's emerged and how it's been unfair and how it has impacted Christians is something to deal with. In this video, I'm not going to make an argument one is worse than the other, okay? I'll leave that up to you. If I do that, then that starts a debate that I really don't want. I'm saying both are bad, both have some similarities, but there are critical differences, which make it difficult for the non-conservative Christian black to understand what conservative Christians are experiencing, and vice versa, for the white to understand what African Americans are experiencing. Does this break some paradigms with you? The paradigm of thinking that all of the isms and all of the sort of discriminations is exactly the same? Well, it's not. And that paradigm is broken for you a little bit. I think that's a good thing. And I hope you've enjoyed this sort of discussion. If you have, please give me a like, give me a comment. If you don't like this discussion, if you think I'm wrong, give me a comment anyways. Tell your friends about this. You know, if you think this is an interesting topic, shoot this video to your friends. And, of course, please subscribe if you want like comments, discussions like this. That's important for someone like me, a small content provider, so I sure would appreciate it. And if you enjoy this sort of talk, you enjoy these sort of discussions, this merging of sociology and Christianity, discussion of racism, Christianophobia, and other things that I'm going to discuss, well, subscribe, come back, where we can shatter some more paradigms.